That's true. Cool. So, yeah, my name is Marta, and I'm from Poland. And today I will be talking about a totally great topic about offline first in Angular. And before I start my session, I have a question for you. So, how many of you have ever heard about progressive web apps? Who ever heard? Awesome, great. So you don't need introduction. Cool. I can skip some of my slides. It's awesome. Great. So the second question is whoever built PWA. Great. Maybe Angular? Cool, good answer. So when you're using Angular, it's very easy to create your basic PWA because you can apply the only one command, this is ng add Angular PWA, and you can generate basic files that are required to create progressive web app. And it's really simple, typically when you have the static data in your app, and the character of your data is the main factor that tells you is it worthy progressively enhance your app into progressive web apps. And today I want to focus on managing data in your app. I want to show you how you can store it locally on your device and synchronize it with the backend automatically. But before I start, let me introduce myself. So my name is Marta Wiśniewska, and I love progressive web apps. And my journey with PWA started over 1 year ago when I was writing my master's thesis. And in my thesis, I compared progressive web apps and hybrid apps. And then I also started creating open source project. This is PWA Fire. In this project, me and my colleague Maya, we create open source resources, code labs, and tools that allows you to create PWA easier and with best practices for web. And I work as Angular developer for a company called ePoint in Warsaw. And this is a software company that is mainly focused on financial and e-commerce sector. And e-commerce is an area where you can find a lot of use cases of PWA. And now I'm working on a project with Angular and Spartacus. And Spartacus is also written in Angular. It's a storefront for e-commerce, just with ready-to-use e-commerce components. And I'm also a huge fan of community. I'm organizer of these two groups, Women Tech Makers Warsaw and Google Developers Group Warsaw. If you have never heard about this, or maybe you want to join to these groups in your city, ping me after the presentation. I would love to help you. And I'm so excited because my company is on global list as a PWA agencies recognized by Google, so it's very cool. And today I want to help you understand offline first approach, but my second goal is to show you how a huge impact developers have on human lives. Because today our life is full of stress, negative energy, and maybe a lot of time you feel like this frog from the picture. That something happens too many times to you, again and again, and regardless of what you do. Do you know this? Or maybe sometimes it's not too bad, but then it is, and you feel totally unstable, dangerously unstable, like, I don't know, like this. Or maybe you feel totally frustrated even of simple things, totally small, circle, loading things, right? So as you can see, this stress, negative energy is a big problem today. And a bunch of scientists did a research on human brains, and they were trying to find solution how to make people happier. And it was amazing because they discovered that the only one way to make people happier is to create fast and stable apps and use offline first. So let's talk about offline first. So it just means that being offline should not be an error condition. This is just additional state to handle in your app. And I suppose that you already know that, but maybe not from web apps, but typically from native apps or desktop apps. For example, if you're using Spotify, the mobile version, and you're offline, you're not able to track music, but you're still able to edit playlists, do stuff like that. And when you have internet access again, then all your clients are synchronized with your data, so it's very cool. And the other case, the Slack, the desktop version. If you're offline, you're not able to send message, but this app still works, and you see the network state and the state of your app, so it's very cool. And what we do in web apps is that we store our data locally on the front-end side, we cache it and show that to the user, and at certain times we synchronize with the backend and fetch new data and store new data. And from perspective of developers, we should write this app if it has no internet connection, and I really compare it with mobile first. So in mobile first, you start implementation for small screens, and then you need to enhance it for bigger. And in offline first, you start implementation for offline state, And if you're sure that this app works properly, you can add more features. You can make this app more powerful. And it's important that this app probably will not work the same way, because it's impossible. But we try to add as many features as we can at this offline state. And there's a lot of advantages of this approach. And the first one is quite obvious, that you can actually build apps that are being able to work offline. But there's more. For example, you can create faster user interfaces, because all your CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete, are moved locally on your device. And you can, for example, use optional model. This is a great way to increase the user interface. And from the other perspective, it's a great way to increase user experience by, for example, inform your user about the network state and the app state. And the last point is about you can batch network requests periodically versus all the time, so it allows you to save bandwidth and also improve battery life. And there are golden rules of offline first approach. And the first one is tells you that you should use local data whenever it's possible. And you can use XML HTTP requests to get network resources and then store it locally in your browser or in device. And today I want to tell you about offline storages that are possible to use in your web app. The second point is about storing separated app user interface from its data. And I suppose that you already know that maybe, even if you're not familiar with progressive web apps and offline first, because it's just easier to manage your app if you have separated it. You can manage your logic, your data, and it's just easier for you as developers. The next point is about storing a state of your data to allow your users pick up wherever he left off. And the last point about testing, so you should make sure that this app works properly in both a common and tricky scenario. And now I want to tell you about offline storages. So there are basic web storages, and I suppose that you already know this, even if you've never built progressive web apps. So session storage and local storage are separated storage areas that allows you to store data in your browser. And session storage exists of the duration, the page session, but local storage is possible to use even if you close and reopen your browser. And they're really common, but have downsides. For example, you need to serialize and deserialize data. They're asynchronous, so can block your app. And from the other perspective, don't have support for web workers. And WebSQL is asynchronous, so it means that it's based on callbacks, so it's a little bit better, but also doesn't have support for web worker. So let's talk about alternatives. So here you can see another list. And you can use, for example, File System API or File API. They're asynchronous also, but File System API doesn't have much power outside of Chrome, and is sandbox, what means that you can't get native file access. File API is a little bit better about the browser support, and includes interfaces like Blob API, File API, or File List API. But from practical perspective, in progressive web apps, we use Index Database and Cache API. An index database is no SQL database where you can store pairs of key and value. And it's really cool because you can store different types of data. It could be JSON, strings, blobs, and so on. And it works everywhere. So have a great support because of browsers. Cache API allows you to store pairs of response and requests that represent HTTP responses and HTTP requests. But from practical perspective, it can contain any type of data that can be transferred over HTTP. And what we do in offline first, that all network resources that are necessary to load your app while it's offline, we store in Cache API. But for other data, we use Index Database. And it's really important that sometimes using Index Database can be tricky in your app. So you have JavaScript libraries that are wrappers for Index Database that are just more developer-friendly and allows you to use it easier in your app. And today I want to focus on PouchDB, but you can also find Dexy.js, JSStore, Local Forage, and other examples. So let's talk about PouchDB. So this is a wrapper for Index Database. And this is just open source JavaScript library that allows you to store data locally on your device. And it's very cool because it works everywhere where JavaScript runs. So you can use it in your web apps, but also in hybrid apps, in desktop apps with Electron or any Node.js app, for example, for IoT devices. And it allows you to synchronize with the backend automatically. So this is a big pro for PouchDB. And this is how you can structure your app with Angular app and PouchDB. And for example, on the backend side, you can use CouchDB. And CouchDB, this is document database, is very similar to MongoDB. So what we do in offline first, we store our data locally on the front-end side. So we create PouchDB, the local database. Then we need to hook it up with the backend for replication to send this data remotely. And it's very cool because if anything changes on the backend side, then we will push changes to the front-end side. And then we need to subscribe these changes on the front-end side and react in proper way. So now it's time for practice. So how you can use it in your Angular app. So we will use these two storages, the cache API and index database. So at the beginning, we need to cache our static data, let's say. So the easiest way to do this apply this command, because if you run it, then you will see that a lot of files will generate that are necessary to generate progressive web apps. And the most important is service worker that allows you to just cache these files. And even if you run it and build it and deploy it on remote server, then you will see that your app works offline. So it's very cool. And the next step, we need to use index database. And in this case, we apply PouchDB. So you can use it with Node.js modules, and you can install it as usual using npm install. And you have two options. The first one is just PouchDB, the full package. But the second one is just PouchDB browser. It's just smaller, and you don't need to install all dependencies, like, for example, for level database and stuff like that. The next point is about installing also PouchDB server, serving this server locally. And if you want to use it in your app, you need to import it and use this way. So you need to initialize this local database, add a name for this database. Then we need to hook it up with backend for replication. So you need to add remote database, and you need to configure the synchronization method. And here you can see an example for bidirectional synchronization. Next step is about implementation CRUD operations. So as usual, how to manage your data in your app, how to apply these basic methods for CRUD. Sorry for forbidden words. And then we need to subscribe and react in proper way. It's a very simple example, but I think that you can catch the idea of offline first, how you can use it in Angular app, enhance it for your requirements. And today I want to show you also the app shell model. And the app shell, it's a way to render a portion of your app via a route at building time. And it allows you to improve the user experience, but quickly launch a static render page. And when your browser downloads the full client version, that it will switch to this automatically after the code loads. And from practical perspective, this is just minimal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that is required to power the user interface of your app. And on the right side, you can see the example. So this is just a skeleton common to all pages. And it's very useful to improve performance on repeat visits. And now you can use CLI to generate app shell model in Angular. So you need to apply this command, this ngGenerate app shell, and you need to add two properties. The first one is client project name, and the second one is universal project name. So this is just a name of universal project or just the server of your app. And the second step is just building. So it depends on the environment. So for the production, you need the last one. And I did a test with the app shell. So I created basic Angular app. I built it and deployed on a remote server. And after that, I added the app shell and rebuilt it and redeployed on the other server. And I tried to refresh both pages. And here you can see an example how it looks like. So on the right side, you can see the app with app shell. So even if you refresh the page, you can see this because the view is returned very quickly to your users. And this is how the app shell model works. So it allows you to get first meaningful pane that appears very quickly, because your browser can simply render HTML and CSS without initialize any JavaScript. And there are results of performance tests. So here you can see 5 metrics for these both apps. So they work the same way, but the first one is without the app shell, and the second with app shell. So you can see that in values of these metrics, the difference is over 20% for each of these. So this is what you can achieve with the app shell. Now I want to show you examples, apps that were created with offline first and with PouchDB. So the first one is very cool. This is Hospital Run. This is open source app for developing called hospitals. So you can take this app into areas where you don't have internet access at all. You can collect healthcare data. And then when you get back to the places when you have internet, for example, the hospital, then all your data is synchronized with all your clients. And it's open source, so you can find a code on the GitHub. The second one is Cozy Cloud, so it's for more personal usages. And you can store their contacts, calendar files, and share between your devices and between your server. And the last one, Financier, so you can store data about your budget and also uses PouchDB, and it's also built with offline first. And it's very useful if you can use it in apps that you get back and use the same, let's say, device, because you can store the storage of this device, but you can also synchronize with all your clients, so it's very cool. Now I want to sum up something. So today I told you about offline first approach. I told you about golden rules and about the advantages of this approach. And I highly recommend you to try this. Maybe it will be useful for you and helpful to build your progressive web apps. And remember that you don't need to use the raw index database. You can use other libraries that are more developer-friendly for you, for example, PouchDB. And remember that offline first is not only about apps that work offline, but also it's a great way to create fast and stable apps and to save the world from sadness, right? And I want to invite you to PWA and offline first communities. So here you can see Slack spaces when you can find people that also work with progressive web apps, where you can ask questions and help each other. If you want to keep in touch with PWA, follow PWA Fire. And if you have any questions about this, you can ping me on Twitter. And this is a great book about PWA with Angular, published this year, so I highly recommend you to read it. And thanks for having me. It's so cool to be there.